and for that beautiful cake and singing. I love that Magnificat also that you sang. That was very beautiful too. And so it's so nice to be able to get together. And I called my mother during the time and told her about the sisters, and she was so happy. And so I told her that we had cake and singing, and she thought it was great. So, well, that's great, sisters. Well, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen.
Amen.
Most Sacred Heart of Jesus, have mercy on us.
us.
Sorrowful and Immaculate Heart of Mary,
Pray for us.
Our Lady of Fatima,
Pray for us.
Our Lady of Lourdes,
Pray for us.
Our Lady of Guadalupe,
Pray for us.
Our Lady of Hampsville,
Pray for us.
Our Lady of Cebu,
Pray for us.
Our Lady of Sioux City,
Pray for us.
Our Lady of Omaha,
Pray for us.
Our Lady of Sioux Falls,
Pray for us.
Our Lady of Dakota Dunes,
Pray for us.
Saint Joseph,
Pray for us.
Saint Joseph the Worker,
Pray for us.
Saint Joseph, foster father of Jesus Christ,
Pray for us.
Saint Joseph, chaste spouse of the ever Virgin Mary,
Pray for us.
Saint Joseph, patron of the universal church,
Pray for us.
Saint Joseph, terror of demons,
Pray for us.
all you holy angels and saints,
Pray for us.
you first martyrs of Rome,
Pray for us.
Saint Maria Goretti,
Pray for us.
in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Last evening, Sister Adrian and Sister Guadalupe told me that you have a special devotion to Saint Maria Goretti, whose feast is this Friday, so we'll look forward to that, first Friday of the month. Well, sisters, it was so nice to get together for the first time, and now we have another chance to get together. Is there anything that you wanted to bring up from the first session, anything that comes to mind that you've been thinking about, that you'd like to comment on or ask or whatever the case may be? It was wonderful to hear you talk the first session about some of the things you were thinking about, and I know painful, and yet what is the saying about there cannot be the resurrection without Good Friday, and there can't be the rose without the thorn, so we know that for sure. But anything you'd like to say or ask about? Yes, Mother.
I'd like to ask some suggestion or advice for those sisters until now frozen and waiting for their, for example, our novices. It's been 7 years. Some of our sisters hopefully have their first profession, second profession. Do you think, Monsignor, what is the best or what is like encouraging words that we can give them at least? Because some they cannot wait anymore because they've been like waiting this event, of course.
Thank you, Mother. Yes. What do we make of this period of being frozen, which, as I understand it, comes from the commissary. And so this is the directive that's been given. Hope I can see everyone here. Well, I would just say this, sisters. I would have to say, thank you, and I don't mean to be a pest about that, but, I would just say this, sisters. I mean, I can only think of what it would have been like in the seminary to have been told that your progress toward ordination has been delayed, and it would even be 7 years. I mean, that would be very hard to understand. It would be very hard to grapple with. And thank you, sister. And I would just say about that, I'm sure it's like a kind of heroic patience that's needed. I would say, Mother, to answer that, it seems to me that this, again, might be one of those things that could be on a case-by-case basis. So that if a particular sister said, I just don't think I can wait. I mean, I think that would be understandable, especially if she thinks, yes, I believe God is calling me to this, but maybe under the circumstances, maybe I need to think about a different place to live the consecrated life. I would not hold that against anyone if somebody came to that conclusion, after prayer and spiritual direction and after thinking about this. Because it is a long time to wait before making progress. Now again, on one level you could say, well, in the eyes of the Lord, what does it matter? As long as we're where He wants us to be. If He wants us to be here, and if I'm going to be a novice for 10 years, it seems very unusual. And it's unusual in regard to the Code of Canon Law. But given the circumstances and being frozen, so to speak, maybe it's a thing that a person just says, well, that was part of the journey, that was part of the pilgrimage, and I accepted it. But if on an individual case, if somebody said, Mother, I just think under the circumstances, because I want to be a religious, maybe I need to go somewhere else. I think that could be painful, yes, but I think that could be accepted as just saying, well, this is a very unusual circumstance, and we don't hold it against you if you are thinking in that direction. That's what I would say. Because it seems like it's just it's a very unusual experience right now. Other communities, would have their own unusual experiences, perhaps not this one, but other ones. So maybe it goes back, Mother, to the idea for each sister to say, what is the Lord asking of me? Is this where He wants me to be? And if He wants me to be elsewhere, then maybe with the help of my superior, I can come to know where that is. Does that make sense? So, I'm sure that's hard. Yes, sister.
This is with regards to rules and laws, like canon law or rules in our community. I don't know where this. In making rules or in following rules, there has to be a delicate balance of the good of the individual and the good of the community. There always seems to be exceptions to the rule. So how would you say, so as the person not to pass judgment on exceptions that are made, not like when maybe the superior will give an exception, so that not to think that she's showing favoritism or anything like. I guess what I'm trying to say is some people have maybe a legalistic form, like mind frame, like this is the rule, this is how it should always be.
Right.
And there's also, there's always an exception to the rule. So, I don't really know how I'm trying to say this, but in looking at rules and the way that they are given and the way that I should follow, what should be our disposition? Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes very good sense, and I hope you heard Sister's comments and questions. This delicate balance, you said, sister, between following a law and then when does a law no longer serve its purpose? And when does the superior have a rightful part to play in this? I think a lot of it depends to, sister, on what kind of law we're talking about. So, for example, that there are different kinds of law. There's God's laws, divine laws, that, are always and everywhere truthful. So, one law would be, we never take the life of an innocent person. Taking the life of an innocent person is always and everywhere wrong. Even in war, you cannot, for soldiers to go into a village and find innocent people, unarmed innocent people, and kill them, even in the midst of war, is a very grave and serious offense against God and against humanity. That's a war crime. Because these are what we call, what's the term used? Non-combatants. These are not, members of the military. They are individuals. Now, practically speaking, that's hard to figure out. Because, you go in a village and they look like villagers. Well, maybe they're the enemy. And maybe they're all armed. So it's very hard on a practical level. But that is a law that's always and everywhere just. There is no exception to that law. So that's divine law. Then the church has certain laws. So you and I are to fast for 1 hour from food and drink before receiving Holy Communion. That is the law. Can that ever be dispensed from? Yes. A pastor could dispense from that on an individual basis. He really can't dispense his parish and say, you don't have to follow this today. No. Let's say somebody comes up and says, Father, it was 40 minutes ago I ate. The pastor could say, I dispense you today. Okay, so that's a dispensation from ecclesiastical law, a church law. Now, when it comes to your order and your community, you have certain precepts, you have certain obligations and demands. So let's say the sister is having trouble, maybe with her health, and she is not able to pray the office. She's not able always to attend the prayers. The superior can dispense her of those obligations. Now, as you say, sister, it gets a little tricky because sometimes we see that and we wonder, well, does this mean we're all dispensed from that? Does this mean if I have something I want to do, that I can be dispensed of the office and communal prayer? And the answer is, well, we would still need to go to the superior and ask, in the particular case, for a dispensation from this. But you're right, we have to be careful that we don't judge because we don't know the individual circumstances. We might be living with the sisters, but we don't know that one is struggling with health or whatever it is, or having trouble getting up, or something going on that just isn't allowing the fulfillment of the precepts of the community. You're right, we have to be very careful about that because all of a sudden we start thinking, gee, why isn't she doing what she should do, number one? And number two, does this mean that I also can be exempted from those things I find difficult? Now the answer to number two is maybe, depending on what it is and depending on my contact with my superior and presenting to her the difficulty and so on. In the diocesan life, let's say, for instance, we have a meeting, the bishop wants all the priests to be there, but there's a meeting somewhere else, and bishop, I know you like when I go to that other meeting, do you want me to go? He might say, well, I think it'd be best if you were with us today. Okay. Or he might say, well, given the importance of that other meeting, I give you permission to go, even though you're going to miss our meeting. Okay. Now, some other priest who sees me and says, doesn't he have to follow the rules too? I mean, that's what happens. Is he favored now because he doesn't have to come to our meeting? And of course, they may not know about this other meeting that the bishop thinks is good to have some attendance at. So I think you're right, sister. We have to be very careful. Maybe it helps to remember the difference in law and also the importance of having a contact with our superior. And if I'm legitimately impeded from doing something, I can go to my superior and say, Sister, I'm having trouble with this. Is there something that could be done about this? Maybe the superior will say, well, keep going, sister, do the best you can. Or maybe she'll say, well, yes, under the circumstances, maybe we should look at something else. So that's how I would answer that, sister. Yes. Thank you. Yes, mother.
So there's one sister that she's not so sure, and then I think all her religious life, she got the confirmation that she's being called to religious life because of the maybe the spiritual director or priest, other spirits, and yes, if they're being called to it, so she said, okay, it's a certification. But there's always a time in her life that she's like, oh, I really cool. Then she asked me, I reversed the question. I told her, like, do you think you're full? Because I can see that you're full. But can you tell that to yourself that you're full or not? She can't answer it. So what will I do? I can't answer you.
Right, Mother. No, that's on a practical basis very difficult. We see somebody we think has the qualifications to be very good as a consecrated person, and the person herself has thought that too, but yet at times the person still doubts. Maybe here we're talking about what is a doubt and how binding is a doubt. Cardinal Newman, Blessed John Henry Newman, had that great saying, and it was more not so much in reference to vocational choice as it was to God's existence, I think, but he said, 1,000 difficulties do not make a doubt. And so in other words, we might have difficulties that don't really mean that we're doubting, but it means, there are these obstacles. But it's not like, I don't doubt that God's calling me, but I just don't see how it can happen. So maybe in that case, Mother, maybe that conversation with that sister can continue. And maybe she's going to be one who is going to need some extra time, which the Code of Canon Law does allow, as you know, for the superior to extend a period of formation. Now, again, as Sister's question was, we might look at that and say, well, what's her problem? Or why can't she decide? But we want to be very careful about that and sensitive, because we don't know what other people. There's that old saying, the Native Americans have that saying, how is that? You can't judge another until you walk in his moccasins. Moccasins are like the slippers, the shoes. So in other words, be careful until we know. Like somebody say with a health ailment, we say, well, what's the big deal? My leg hurts or my arm hurts, but you don't know what that is until you go through that. So I would say, Mother, maybe that conversation could continue. As you say, you can't answer for her. In the long run, she will have to answer. And that's why the Church, although the Church is willing to extend the period of discernment, there is a day when that discernment has to be over. Or otherwise, it becomes perpetual discernment. And then all of a sudden, you get to be 45, 50, 55, and it's like, maybe I missed my calling. Now, that's very unfortunate, and we grieve for those people. And there are people like that, and they become very, they live a life of great remorse and sadness, because they think, maybe I missed what God wanted of me. And so, we want to be sensitive to that. But the wonderful thing is, a superior can call an end, and maybe has to it sometimes, and a bishop too. With a man, let's say, who's thinking about seminary. There's an end. So yes, you've got this time, I'll extend this time, I'll even extend it again. But at a certain point, the time of discernment is over, and now we're going to have to decide. And if I'm not called to the religious life or the priesthood, I can be very happy living a vital, joy-filled, enthusiastic life as a lay person, as a married person, as a single person, as the case may be. Great. The church needs all that too. Saw these beautiful families here today. What a gift that is. We don't envy them. If our vocation is this, it's not as if we look at that and say, oh, I really missed out. Well, that's unfortunate if a person has that. And if a person has that, hopefully the person can talk to his or her spiritual director or the superior about that. If you look at that and say, oh, I should have chosen that and not this. And hopefully those people don't look at us and say, either, oh, I really missed what I should have done. I see those families and I think, wonderful, good for them, what a gift. But it's all under the banner of, look, that's their vocation. This is your vocation, this is my vocation, thank God, praise Him. as Sister Guadalupe said last night, praise Him. May He be praised. And, I think that's so true. So, Mother, I would just say that conversation that we can have with those undergoing those doubts is a beautiful and holy thing, too. And, superiors, whomever we are, brothers and sisters, we want to help people carry their cross. We want to be sympathetic. We don't want to be too tough. I mean, yes, superiors have to be diligent and they have to draw a line at times, and bishops and pastors, yes. But, that we can still be understanding and still be loving and still be compassionate, I think is so important. To be compassionate, to be merciful as the Father is merciful. Thank you, Mother. Sister, are you going to sing? Yes.
I was wondering, in this time that we're frozen, what can we do for those young girls who are interested in our community and becoming sisters?
Beautiful question. What can you do? So the question maybe then, Sister, is a question to you and superiors. During this period of being frozen, are you able to continue contacts with girls and women who are interested?
Yes.
So you're still able to do that? Okay. So, I would say then, I think, Sister, the best you can do is continue your joyful life, your life of witness, and, showing to them what following God looks like on a practical level. I think that still very much can be done. Even though, as long as the commissariat hasn't said, you may not have contact with women, girls who are thinking about your life, you may not have any communication with them, all that is closed off, okay, then we'll have to be obedient. But given that that's not part of the command, it seems to me you can continue being a good and holy example for them and raising up what it's like to be called by God and the fact that you're pursuing your vocation. That's what I would say. Because, they still look at you and they see joyful, young, committed, faith-filled women. And that's marvelous. We need that so badly. So keep it up, sisters. Keep it up. That's beautiful. Yes, singing and everything. Yes. Do you get a chance to have contact with some girls who are, oh good. So you get a chance to do that. And how are you seeing that? Are you seeing young girls and women interested in your community or seeing some interest? Great. Fantastic.
We have youth groups, Monsignor, we have youth groups and young adults that ask for advice, and it's like they want to be invited. You can't invite them yet, but
Right.
so we just invite them, befriend them.
Yes. And maybe too, maybe there's, given that you're in different areas and countries and states, maybe there are some cultural differences too. I don't know how that works exactly like in the Philippines, but I know that here in the United States, there's kind of a, how would you say, a pressure that I think that sometimes young women feel that they need to get going. Maybe Philippines less. Maybe it's still very acceptable for girls to live at home for some years in the Philippines. And certainly we have young women live with their mothers and fathers too, which is beautiful. But in some cases, like maybe it's the American thought is that after a while you need to be on your own and decide what you're going to do with your life. Or if not, you're almost kind of a failure. Well, of course, for a 25-year-old to be a failure, that seems not correct. But whereas in the Philippines, maybe it's still more accepted that you have women who are still at home 30 years age, 35 perhaps, so on. So yeah. So some cultural things too, I suppose, some differences, but no, sisters, I think it's great, even though you're not able to accept, you're maintaining those contacts. And see, the beauty of that, in my mind, is even if you were not frozen, that's what you would be doing. It's almost like even being frozen, you're still doing what you would be doing if you weren't frozen. Right? So, I mean, it's like, yes, you can't accept, but you're still trying to be a good witness and a good example. So I think that's a marvelous thing. We need your witness, sisters. I mean, we do. And as you know, in our culture today, we just need this so badly. People are interested. Last night, the sisters were kind. We would not have had to stop on the way, but they said, "Oh, we'll stop." And so I don't know. I'm sure you saw two sisters, but those people in that place where we stopped to eat were very interested in us. Did you remember see that? And they were very kind. They were Chinese and then African American, and of course, they're not Catholics. They're probably not Catholics. But yet they see us and they're interested, and they see us pray, they see us talk, they see the way we're dressed. It's a Friday, we're eating fish. So they see all that. Just as we would if a Muslim came in and didn't, we'd be very surprised if a Muslim came in and ordered pork. I mean, or a Jewish person ordered pork. What's going on? But here we are, and they see that, they notice that, and they see how we act, and that's so very important. Going to the store, and I was in the airport yesterday, and a lot of people were very kind, especially here in Birmingham. I mean, they see priests all the time in Chicago, and they were kind there too, but here, I mean, I had so many walk by me who made a point, I could tell, made a point of looking at me and saying something to me. But it's not very interesting. Of course, Alabama's not Catholic. I mean, it just doesn't have the number of Catholics that some states have. So I suppose it is rather odd at times to see a priest or a sister, but all kinds of people, and people from different nationalities. And it's very interesting. But I think also, sisters, remember too that they want to see how we respond to things. Yesterday we were delayed. The plane was delayed about 6 hours. That was no big problem. But so here I was on the flight, and a young woman, a Hispanic woman, was the flight attendant. And so she came by to offer anything a person wanted to drink. So I just said to her, I said, "Well, did you have to come last night? Did you stay overnight?" And she said, "Yeah," because what happened was the plane never showed up. So they came and they were waiting for the plane. The plane never came. That's why we waited 6 hours. I didn't wait in the airport that long because we got these texts early in the morning. So, we didn't have to go out there. So that was fine. But the flight attendant was waiting with the captain and the other pilot. So when I said that to her, she said, "Yeah." She said, "We were here last night, but then the plane came this evening." And then she said to me, she said, "And I'm sorry about the delay." She got this big smile. Now, it was like, no big deal for me, but had I responded like in an angry way or impatient, try to do that better next time or whatever, she would have remembered that. Who's this priest talking to me like this? So you just know that when we're dressed like this, we especially have to be attentive, I think. Otherwise, we really can cause scandal. Now, yes, we have our bad days. We can be impatient. God forgive us for the times we have been. But you just think to yourself, we want to be aware of who we are and try to act in a dignified way. Otherwise, they can really be scandalized. And in some cases, and we might think, this would never happen, but today the faith of some folks is rather fragile. And so when they hear that a priest or a sister has done something bad, that really affects them badly. And I'm never going to Mass again. And that happens. So we really have to be careful of that. It's not that we want to be too tight or not be joyful, but they like to see us. They like to see us smile and say hello. I think they do. In a place where you have a lot of Catholics, it's like they don't really know us. They don't really know what we're about. But still, they would be interested. I thought to myself when you were singing, you were singing a number of things from the Old Testament, and I thought, we could have a Jewish person here who would hear that and understand that. King David, understand that. Or, the Lord is my light. I mean, that's all the Psalms. So they could, they know that. Protestants would see that and know that. So, we do have areas of connection because of the Scriptures. So that's interesting. I'm speaking too much, sisters. But I'm happy to hear I'm happy to hear these wonderful questions. Yes, sister.
What would you say about, actually I have two. One thing would be, one thing about human formation, we've been asked how can we improve our human formation? My question is here on the missions, in the beginning, I guess we had a lot of radical practices, and so what could we do here on the mission since we can't go back to formation, but do you have any recommendations on how we could improve or learn more about human formation as a religious? And my second question is about spiritual direction. Do you have anything to say about the importance of a spiritual director or how to say?
Yes, sister. So the first question is human formation. Sisters, I kind of always go back to something that I heard years ago when I first entered the seminary. It was the first day in the seminary. And the rector of the seminary talked to us about the 4 kinds of formation. Never forgot what he said. And this is applicable to all of us, not only in our initial formation, but also our ongoing formation. So, number 1 would be our spiritual formation. Growing in the Lord, growing in the spiritual virtues, becoming more and more the Lord's subjects, more and more His disciples. And then we would have academic formation, so that our minds be trained, our intellects be formed in the ways of God, in the ways of the church. Scripture, dogma, history, liturgy, Mariology, Christology, pneumatology, all these great areas. And then we would have apostolic formation. How are we formed as apostles? As you say, sister, the missions. How are we involved in reaching out as Christ sent us out two by two? And then finally, the final category is called different things. Some have called it communal formation. Some have called it human formation. The idea of living together, the idea of our own growth as individuals, trying to obtain the human virtues, being more gracious, being more honest, being more helpful to others. So the notion that we live in a community, the notion that we have relationships, the notion that we are to grow as members of the human race, of the human community. So, as I said, we have that in our initial formation as young religious, young seminarians. We also have that as in ongoing and continuing formation. So how do we grow in human virtues? I think is what Sister's question is. I would say that I think this is very closely connected to our spiritual life as well. The more we draw close to God, I think the more we see how we are to become members of the human race, better members. You might say, well, aren't they two distinct things? Well, there is, I suppose, a separation, but they're so closely intertwined. So, for example, sister, if let's say, and I think it's hard maybe to divide these in, really in a rigid separation, but if I am an impatient person and I really don't listen to people, I kind of talk and I don't really give people attention, I think there's a spiritual component to that. Yes, there's a human component, but the spiritual side, I think, has to inform the human element here. So, Lord, how do you want me to be gracious? How do you want me to be patient? And then with that human formation, I think a lot of it also goes back to that communal aspect. So if I'm trying to grow as a human person in the human virtues, it's not just for myself or for attention paid to myself, but it's also for my relationships with others. So, am I a forgiving person? Am I overly demanding of others? Do I allow myself to cut corners, so to speak, but I am so unwilling to see that other times other people cut corners too, and they should at least be treated with the deference that I give to myself. I think I would say with that, sister, that I think the superior will be very instrumental in this, helping us understand, and a superior helping to see, in the community what is needed in this area for growth in our human relationships. Maybe do I monopolize? Do I take advantage of others? Am I always at the center of attention? How willing am I to share with others? Does it always have to be my way in the missions? Am I willing to enter into a conversation with others? Or is it always, look, this has worked for me, why can't it work for you? That's what I would say about that, sister. And again, I think the superior here is going to be very useful in this. To say, the superior will see the community and say, I think we're lacking in humility. I think we're lacking in understanding of others. I think we're becoming too maybe tense with others in the community and not being so forgiving. That's how I would say. Okay, sister. Any comment on that? Is that just Mother? Did you? Yes, Mother.
Yeah, because that's what we are asked also to have new information. And when we first we're so afraid because we might sound like UHD or something.
Oh, yes.
So then we started to have look for speakers who can give us new information.
Right. Can you give an example, Mother, of like what a speaker would say? Yes,
We
Mother.
are asked to attend this by the commissary to attend these psychosexual seminars, and so there's some like we are asked, and they give us some speakers, and it's really something that it's really because they thought that we are so much on spiritual formation, but we are lack on human formation. We do not know how to handle because they thought that we are too much like on spiritual things, but when it comes to I don't know what's
Yes, Mother.
yeah.
So, like for example, that the criticism was you're very attentive to spiritual life, but not so attentive to growing as individuals, Mother.
Just like for example, Monsignor, our orarium. Okay, so initially our orarium was very, very rigid and very strict. And when the PC saw our orarium that we were waking up at 1:30 at 3 o'clock and sleeping very late at 10, 11, and we didn't have that balance, I guess. They thought that we had lacked that information that we are being being inhuman, that we are abusing our because what happens is yes, we do wake up at 3 o'clock, we pray, but during prayers we're all dead because we're sleepy, because during mass we doze off because we didn't get that enough rest.
Yes.
So they've asked us to do this, to listen and to attend seminars of human formation so that we may be because they think it was lacking in our formation.
That's very interesting. And I mean, I would just say to that, yeah, and I suppose the tricky thing is, what is really a movement of the Spirit and what is not? So, could you ever imagine a religious community which would, stay up until 12:30 and be up again at 3 o'clock or 3:30? Yes. I mean, some of the Poor Clares, some of the ones who are in monastic settings. Now, maybe what's being said here is, and I'm just guessing, but maybe what's being said is, your orarium seems more like a contemplative or monastic community than it does an active community. So maybe that's what was being said. Where I think the real discernment comes is, we don't want our generosity to be blunted or put aside. We want to be generous in the Lord. We want to be servants. We want to be attentive. But yes, could there ever be waking up at certain hours and we get so tired that during the Mass we're falling asleep or we're inattentive to other parts of the day? Yes, I suppose that's true. And that's why I guess a lot of trust is needed in this area. That hopefully the commissariat is also seeking God's will in this regard. Now, Mother, you mentioned about these seminars, the psychosexual seminars. What I would say about that is sometimes today, those I think can be helpful. On the other hand, yes, I think at times there can be a kind of New Age thrust. And I'm not saying that that's true in what your seminars have been. But some of it gets to be so person-centered that it's a lot about me. It's a lot about I. And then, is this really what God wants? Growing in our understanding of who we are as psychologically, sexually, the gift of humanity, the gift of male and female, beautiful, God from God. I think sometimes that can get off. And we do need discernment about that. Yes, because we don't want to all of a sudden become gods and goddesses or, like we're so, we start looking at everything under the lens of psychosexual things. It gets bizarre and odd. And so I think, sisters, if you ever run into that or they want to, this seminar, go to the seminar, to be able to ask somebody about that and say, does this sound right? Father Midge Pakwa, whom you know from EWTN, when you mentioned New Age, I thought of him because he has, over the years, really gone hard at things like the Enneagram. The Enneagram? You know that? That Enneagram, I don't know a lot about it, but it's like a test that people take to figure out where their strengths are. And he would say that comes from Sufi mysticism, which is, a Middle Eastern kind of religious understanding of things. And it gets odd. I heard once of a religious community that when a plane went over the house, would stand on a certain mat because they were afraid of rays, or if they were using the microwave, they'd stand on a mat. Now, how much of that is really solid professional medical knowledge, and how much of that is just odd? See, and I'm not an expert about those things, so I don't know, but if you were to tell people that when the plane goes by, you stand on a mat, they would probably say, well, what does that mean? you know? Now, we don't go so far the other extreme and say, well, we abuse our health, we don't take care of ourselves. Sister was telling me that Father Stanislaus is helping you eat well, you know, nutrition, good, that's beautiful. And we're growing in our understanding of that. You know, I'd have to say in the years since I was, you know, entered the seminary, we've had a lot of interest in nutrition, and you know, we shouldn't be eating candy, just candy, or we should be, you know, I mean, we should be, or that wonderful cake that, you know, we probably should have 7 pieces of that, at least not every day, you know, maybe once a day, maybe once a week, maybe once a month. But the point is that, you know, we have to, moderation. And of course that goes back to the Gospels, it goes back to St. Thomas, you know, being moderate. So, you know, sisters, if you run across things like that, these seminars we should go to, we're being told by the diocese or the commissary, you need to go to the psychosexual seminar, it'd be good to see, you know, just what is this? And then to find out who the speaker is. And just what is this person's background? Because, you know, sisters, again, today things are odd. Very odd. I heard of a seminar that was going on in Rome, a class at one of the pontifical universities in which the presenter was saying that how wrong Humani Vitae is, and that Humani Vitae should be read in light of Amoris Laetitia. Now, that to me just sounds odd, that, you know, Humani Vitae from 50 years ago should now be read in light of a document from Pope Francis that is not at the same level as an encyclical. To me, that sounds odd. And, you know, all of a sudden we're saying that, and then supposedly this priest said there may be times when using contraception is a moral thing to do. You know, how is this possible? So, you know, if we're told you really need to go and listen to that, well, how bound am I to listen to that? Or who's telling me I have to do that? If the Pope says I should go, well, okay, I'll go. If the Bishop says I should go, but what is this about? You know, that's what I would say. And yeah, today, sisters, I mean, you know, the devil has wormed himself in very good and holy places. I knew of a community of religious who got very involved in strange ways of eating. And it had to be the most expensive foods. It had to be only organic foods. Now, don't get me wrong. We should be thinking about nutrition. We should be trying to do the right thing. And we should be going to our medical professionals and seeking assistance. I think that's very good. I'd say that's part of human formation. You know, taking good care of our health, which is God's gift, and, you know, seeking to use the right medicine. See, you know, we've got a problem. Okay, let's go and talk to somebody. Fine, great. And you sisters, you know, you're valuable and precious people, and you need to take care of your good health, of course. But when does that just become bizarre? You know, we can never eat certain things that our lay people eat because that's not good enough for us. I think that's odd. Or I always have to have the best steak. I always have to have the best meat. I won't take anyone's hamburger. I need to have the $10 hamburger. What, you know, what's that about? You know, now again, maybe for my health, maybe there's something in my health that doesn't allow me certain kinds of meat or whatever. Okay, great. And maybe we can work with that. And some sisters, she can't have gluten. She can't have this. She's watching her cholesterol. Great. I'd say that's part of human formation too. And that seems legitimate to me. But you know, I always have to have the most expensive television, the most expensive telephone, the best car, the best clothes. And you say, is that the carpenter of Nazareth? You know, I think we have to ask that. You know, whom are we following here? Is it the advice of modern society, or is it the Lord? So, And again, some people want to invite us. Oh, Father and Sister, we're going to have a beautiful fish dinner, and we just caught this, and you probably paid $30 in the restaurant. Okay, well, we're not going to do that every day, and they want to have us, and that's beautiful. But, that's different than I will only eat that. I want the best of the best. Then we say, something seems out of whack there. Does that make sense, sisters? Does that seem right? Anything else on that before we get to Sister's second question? Sister's second question, spiritual direction. I know that different communities have a different custom about this. So, as I understand it, some communities have spiritual direction kind of built into their framework, and there may be priests available or trained spiritual directors available who are available to the sisters when they have questions. For other communities, spiritual direction does not seem to be part of the tradition. So if there's a special request to talk to a priest, say outside of confession, then the sister would probably go to the superior and ask for permission to do that. Maybe some of this here, sisters, can be, maybe the fear sometimes is a kind of lack of trust, or somehow we might think, gee, if sister goes and talks to Father, will Father criticize something happening in the community? Like if sister says, well, gee, Father, I have diabetes and it's not being taken care of. And then all of a sudden, Father, goes to superior and says, Sister, why aren't you helping sister with her diabetes or something? I'm just throwing something out. So, and that would be like a physical kind of thing. But maybe a spiritual thing. And maybe it goes back to what we talked about before. Did I make a good decision when I became a member of the community? Is God calling me elsewhere? What is the Lord asking of me? So I think, sisters, that spiritual direction can have a place. Hopefully, the superiors know priests whom they trust, who would really be helpful, and not taking sides or not saying, oh, superior is wrong, or saying sister is all wrong, but rather to be able to say, maybe there's some conversation that can help in trying to understand this difficulty. So I think, sister, there can be a place for it. Maybe it's not always built into the constitutions of a particular community, but that's not to say that maybe on a case-by-case basis that it could not be helpful. Is that, sister, mother, anything you want to say about that? Does that, would you say, seem to be right?
You would say it depends on the constitution, or because one of our speakers is asking us that you should have a spiritual director. You have to ask your member to see a spiritual director because it's not on all their shoulder to answer their and sometimes they are not. There are some sisters they would like to not to talk with outside the community.
Sure.
Yes.
Sure.
But they told us that we should have a spiritual director.
For all the sisters?
Yes.
So that,
They're asking us to help.
I see. So the commissary is asking that?
Because they asked us to attend on this human formation, Monsi, and because they selected, they choose this speaker, and this speaker is telling us now we have to assign or we have to give them freedom and to have a spiritual director.
Right. And did you want to add something, Mother? Yes.
Monsignor. Because it's in our tradition, in our community, we have our spiritual directors our spiritual directors are our priests, the priests from our institute, like from the Oblate Apostles of the Two Hearts.
Oh.
Okay. So when we advise, counsel, we go to them and we do manifestation. We call it a manifestation, and we open our hearts to them if you have any difficulty. I guess the question is is it even in canon law that we should have one, or is it really a tradition? I guess it's just a practice of religious or of that community, or must we, or can we, like, some sisters are just fine. I don't want to say they don't need one, but I guess they have can as religious or as consecrated soul, should there be that always that element of having that spiritual direction regularly?
You get the impression that you're being told that the sisters have to go and talk? Or are you getting the impression you should have one available in case the sisters want to talk?
It's safe, Monsignor, both. Both ways, yes.
Well, you know, I mean, I would just say that there could be a great advantages, I'm sure, to having a spiritual director. If the commissariat is going to say that your constitutions need to be rewritten in order to have a spiritual director at all times that all the sisters must go to, then it sounds like that's going to be a major change. I mean, if the commissariat is saying, look, you need to have 1 or 2 or 3 priests around who are always available to serve as spiritual director to the sisters if needed, then that seems to be one thing. If you're being told the sisters must go and talk to him, then I would say, then that almost sounds like the constitutions would need to be rewritten in order to reflect that. Now, what I would just say about that is, it seems to me then that the spiritual directors will need to understand your community the best they can. The idea of manifestation is always a little bit nerve-wracking, because, what kind of element of confidentiality is there? I mean, if I was a spiritual director, if Mother asks me to be a spiritual director, and Sister comes to me and says something to me, and manifests her conscience to me, it has to be very clear what kind of secret that is. There are different levels of secrets. Am I able to say, Mother, did you know that Sister told me this? I mean, I would just say that that's dangerous. I mean, then all of a sudden Sister says, Father, I told you that in confession. Well, then you're dealing about, the sacramental seal, which may not be broken. So I would just say that that is something I think maybe to be attuned to as time goes on. Just what is being asked of you. I mean, if, the commissariat says, look, mothers, you should have, 2 or 3 priests you have them, you approve of them, you know them, they know you, and if the sisters want to go and present something to them, they're capable and they know how to deal with that. Great. But if it's like, look, all you sisters always are going to have to go every month or every 3 months or whatever and manifest your conscience to a spiritual director, I would just say, what does that mean? And how can that information be used? I mean, I think that's serious. I'm not saying that, don't get me wrong, I think spiritual direction is beautiful and great and marvelous. But it's like, if you're being told you must go to a spiritual director, that is not in the Code of Canon Law. I'm not saying it's not good, but it seems to me that would have to be clearly written in the constitutions or the statutes or whatever. Now, maybe the idea here is that the commissariat or whomever thinks that your community would benefit from having priests to whom you could go to talk about matters. That's fine. My only thought about that is it clear to those priests what they may share and what they may not share? I mean, Sister comes to me, she doesn't want me, she surely has the right to expect that I'm going to keep confidential what she tells me, unless it's clear that, look, sister, the reason you're coming to me is because then I serve as a intermediary with mother. I think that's odd, because sister should be able to go to mother whenever she needs to. That's what I would say. Now, maybe too, when you started talking about this, I thought to myself, maybe what the commissariat is saying is that your spiritual director should not be the priest of the order or something. That maybe, Father Stanislaus and the others shouldn't serve. Maybe that was what I wondered was being said, because they would say, well, look, you know them and you should have somebody out apart from your community or something. But it doesn't sound like that was really said. So, maybe that's one of those areas that could be just kind of put in the back of your mind, and when that comes up, maybe to talk with the commissariat about just what does this mean on a practical level. I hope Sister answers that a little bit. So I would say direction, great, a big help, but is it available? Or are you being told you must avail yourself of it? Is it mandatory? Is it optional? That would be what I would want to know. And if it's mandatory, and that's not in your constitutions, it seems to me that needs to be changed then. Because, how would you know that? As you say too, Mother, if it's not mandatory, some of the sisters may not avail themselves of it. They just think, well, at this point, I don't think I need to. I go to confession. Any questions I have, I talk to Father in confessional. Fine. But now, let's be clear too, sisters. When the spiritual direction, that comes with a certain guarantee of confidentiality. I think I have about 11 people I have for spiritual direction. Some are deacons, some are lay people, one is a priest. I'm not talking about what they tell me in the office, because the idea is this is in the internal forum. It's not the confessional, it's true, but it's internal. I wouldn't put that in a newspaper. I wouldn't go to the bishop and say, oh, did you just hear what deacon told me? Anything like that. That too has to be treated with great reverence. Yes, Mother. That has to be treated with great reverence too. So that's what I would say, maybe to clarify just exactly what's being asked here.
Because Monsignor, before we were asked to go to our spiritual director. We were not forced, well, it's kind of forced, because we would have to line up for manifestation. We have to answer all these personal questions and to the oath priest. So the Pontifical Commissary said, no, that's not right. You can ask your members if they want to get a spiritual director to choose one of their whoever they think they can open up their heart and soul to, with of course the permission of the superior. If the superior with approval of the superior that this priest is holy, this priest understands our charism, understands our way of life. So I think that's how it went.
So before the commissariat, this was expected of you. I see. Now I understand. Okay. So I was thinking maybe it was going the other direction, that you were not expected to do this, and now the commissariat is telling you you should do this.
We've been doing it ever since Monsignor, but
I see.
But it was kind of like we were forced to.
I see. Yes, and I can understand why the commissariat would be cautious about that, because of this idea of the manifestation of conscience. Like, if you came up to me on the street and said, oh, hello, Father, and I said, well, hello, Sister. Sister, have you committed any mortal sins today? Like that would be a manifestation of conscience that is not allowed. Or say a young boy or young girl in the parish came and 16, 17 years of age, and and I ask questions about, are you going and drinking? Are you going and doing bad things? Are you obeying your parents? I mean, it would be one thing the confessional would say, well, how's it going? And, is there anything you want to say? But, for me to go up to Sally or Joe and say, now, I suppose, depending on how you know the person and, you have a relationship with the person and, oh, I saw your mom, dad, how they doing? Or, okay, but are you obeying your parents? That would be odd. I mean, that's right. Now, if Father Bing had that in the Constitution before, I'm sure it's for his idea of the growth in holiness, how beautiful, and so on. I imagine the commissariat is probably saying this is something that needs to be reconsidered, because the nervous part of that is then how is that information used? Is that used against you? Like if one of the sisters came and said to me, and this was manifestation, well, I'm jealous of Sister so-and-so. Let's just say. Just making this up, but okay. So, I now take that information, and what would I do with it? Would I go to Sister so-and-so and say, why are you making Sister jealous? Or would I, or I go to the superior and say, did you know that Sister is jealous of Sister so-and-so? Like, why would I, what is that about? Now, it's beautiful that Sister can humbly say, well, I'm a little jealous of Sister so-and-so. Okay, Sister, so have you thought about how you might grow in this and so on? Okay. But that almost sounds to me more like confession. That's what I would say. But thank you for that clarification, because the commissariat is not telling you you must have spiritual directors, but that was what it was before. Okay, so now I understand. Yes, Sister.
Can you just clarify? I don't mean to prolong it, but
Sure.
Like in your words, how could you define spiritual direction? What is spiritual?
What is spiritual direction? Good question, Sister. I mean, there will be different definitions, but when people come to me and I talk, kind of the first time, I'll say something like, because it was something that came from my director in the seminary. He told me that his role was to help me walk to the altar. And so, here we have lay people, so they're not preparing for the priesthood or for religious life, but I might say, well, I see my role helping you get to heaven. That's how I would say that. Now, that's pretty vague in some ways, but it gets maybe across the idea that I want to be helpful to you in growing in likeness to Christ, in growing in likeness to Mary, so that you can get to heaven, which is our home for all of us. That's what I would try to say. So as spiritual, as sisters, the growth in holiness, living your vows more perfectly, becoming the religious God has called you to be, I think that's what spiritual direction would be for you. And having someone with whom you could talk about that. But I agree, as you said, Mother, to have somebody who knows your life and who really understands. So if the superiors here had a sister who came and said, Mother, may I please have spiritual direction? I think it would be appropriate, seems to me, because it doesn't seem like it's contrary to your constitutions, and as a matter of fact, it has had a place in your constitutions. I mean, I would think Mother could have a list of 2 or 3 priests whom she really trusts and who knows your life, and could say, well, yes, Sister, if you want to talk to one of the priests outside of confession, here are 3 priests whom we know, they know us, they know our life, and why don't you call upon one of them? And I think that would be fine. And then to have it clear with the priest and the sister that this sacred information is not going to be used against the sister. I think today's sisters, and this is one of the things that maybe not so much for you here in the U.S. and the Philippines, but one of the challenges today for a lot of religious communities is getting women and girls who have been through some terrible things in their life, through no fault of their own many times. Physical abuse, sexual abuse. They didn't ask for any of that. They weren't leading sinful lives, but they were preyed upon. How do we be gentle? How are we loving? How are we good to these people who want to live a life of holiness, who want to imitate Christ? And yet, there's some, as we say, the word baggage. There's some heavy things that come in their lives that they themselves didn't choose. It wasn't like they were living sinful lives. But maybe they came through a very difficult home environment. We see this, sisters, among the sisters, we see this among some seminarians, living in very sad family situations. They didn't choose it, they didn't seek it, they didn't want it. But that was how they came into the world. Mother had a drug abuse problem. Father was gone most of the time. Tough. Mother has 4 boyfriends. Tough. Tough. How do you deal with that? And how are you loving and gentle? That girl, that young woman who comes to you with that, she didn't seek any of that. She didn't look for any of that. That's really painful. And how are we, and that's why also, too, sisters, I would say, you and I are not equipped to deal with those things. And we should know that. If somebody would come to me with heavy sexual abuse, I would try to be loving, I would try to be kind, but I am not trained to go very deeply into that. Now, we have to be careful in this area too, sisters, because some people who are trained in these areas come at it from a very different perspective than a Catholic perspective. So we want to make sure, if we can, to be able to deal with, hopefully, with people trained in the Catholic life who understand your life, who understand the life of the priest, who can gently lead people through this. I remember a lady called me years ago from a different state, and I met her 90 seconds of my life once, and she started, talking about this. I didn't know what to say, but I listened. Well, then later she wasn't very happy with me, and she said that I should have sent her earlier to somebody else. Well, I wasn't giving her any advice other than spiritual advice, but I never said that, you shouldn't go to somebody, or, because those kinds of things are so heavy. And, you're talking about, people who want to kill themselves because of that, or they see no hope. They were treated so badly. And how do we deal with that? We have to be very sensitive. We can't laugh, we can't, or joke, or anything. That is like, these people have really been through terrible suffering. And sisters, this is all over the place. This is all over the place. Women who have been through abortions, God bless them. And a lot of that too, forced. They didn't seek it, or they were violated. They weren't living promiscuous lives. They had terrible violation, maybe from a family member. And then somebody said, you need to have an abortion. And went through that. And of course, women who have had abortions, oftentimes, that doesn't come up for many years. There are women who have had that, and they don't really touch that for 30 years. So, here in the United States, abortion was allowed in 1973. That's 45 years ago. There are chances that there are women who've had abortion in the 1970s who still really haven't touched that yet. And, what did I do? Mother, you had some question?
Just in connection with that, Monsignor, because very early in our establishment of our community, when we were recruiting, we hardly had the control. Everyone wanted to be, we just accepted everyone because we were beginning, and so all these vocations came in. And we
hardly knew what we were supposed to do also. So we missed so many things here and there, like evaluations and really all those things, Monsignor. So is there, I mean, I'm sure there is, but can you enlighten us with regards to the canon laws regarding those, I mean, in the future, so that if we, when we start recruiting and when we start accepting members, for us to be aware in general of those. Because we are experiencing, not just in our community, but in the other institutes, that all these problems, especially in psychological problems, because it was not checked before. And so we don't want, we want to take care of them, and just now that we are helping them out, they're seeing doctors and everything. So we just wanted to know the norms regarding that.
Yes, Mother. Well, it's interesting because, Mother, I think canon law is silent about a lot of those things. You know, like generally, a lot of that is kind of left up to the individual community and maybe kind of the accepted wisdom that's been around for years. What I would say in a case like that, God willing, when you start accepting, I think, Sister, you mentioned CMSWR earlier. I think there'd be some great context in CMSWR. You know, I'm thinking of one of the orders that has psychological experts is the Alma Sisters, the Religious Sisters of Alma, Michigan. They have, some of their members are psychologists and psychiatrists, and I think, and canon lawyers. I think they would be a good thing. Did you know, sisters, you who are in Omaha, Dakota Dunes, and Sioux City, they're just east of you in Jackson, Minnesota. Do you know that? They're 85 miles east of Sioux Falls. So there's a lot of expert advice. Those sisters, a lot of those sisters, some are doctors, medical doctors, and you know, if you need some reference, we can always get information to you about how to contact them. But one of the sisters, Sister Esther Mary, maybe you met her in Sioux City, but she was in the office there helping the bishop for the last year, and she just has left now, but she was a sister from Alma. But anyhow, what I would say, Sister, Mother, when that day comes, whatever you can avail yourself of some of that wisdom from some of those sisters who have the expertise, I think would be tremendous. And then CMSWR has so many communities within it who will have navigated this already. But yes, I mean, I would just say with that, Sister, Mother and Sisters, is that, you know, when you have somebody come to you, just to be aware that it's different than it used to be. You know, say 60, 70 years ago, these were girls who would come who grew up in Catholic homes, and they went to Mass every Sunday, and some went every day, and some went to Catholic school. They prayed the rosary at home. You know, pretty typical Catholic life. And it's, you know, that there's still some of that, but very rare. Philippines, perhaps more of it. But today, that's pretty unusual. Or the boys who went to the seminary, 12 years of Catholic school, studied Latin, altar boys, all that stuff, just bang, bang, bang. Today, you know, boy who comes, you know, is now 25 and he's been away from the church for 5 years. I mean, different. Never went to Catholic school, never prayed at home, mom is gone. And again, not to condemn. You don't want to get into that. God is kind, and we want to be kind. We want to be good, and we want to be merciful. But also just to be aware that we're in a very different circumstance today. That's how I would say. And Mother, too, you know, you just to know that there are mothers, there are vehicles and helps with this. And sometimes, you know, maybe at a certain point, if a woman is dealing with a lot of things, maybe it's not quite the time that she can be received yet. But that's not to say we slam the door or say, get out of here, or whatever. Maybe in due time. Thank you, Mother. Thank you, Sister. Well, I know, sisters, I don't want to cause any problem for your schedule. Did you want a little break? What would you want to do? I know we haven't talked about Our Lady, and I know hopefully we've talked about her in and out of different places, but what would you like to do?
Just, we can have just a 5-minute break.
5-minute break. Okay, that'll be fine.